Shustoff.
Shustoff. There we go. Awesome. Well, welcome everybody to a Friday edition of Sponsorship Morning Coffee. I'm here with Tim Shustoff over at Eagle Sports Properties in Eastern Washington University. Tim, how's it going this morning? How are you? How's everything over in Eastern Washington?
It's good, man. We're just grinding away on a Friday. Got, I think, 4 Zoom calls in a row after this, so it'll send me off on a high note to the weekend.
It's Zoom fatigue is a real thing I never thought would be a real thing. It's, everybody's like, hey, let's work remote, let's work from home. Sometimes in-person meetings aren't as great, but when you're just on a screen kind of back to back to back, it's interesting how fatigued you can kind of get on that end.
It for sure is. I've started figuring out which ones I need to be on video and which ones I can just take on my headphones so I can at least be walking or something, because sitting and staring at the screen, by the end of the day, my eyes feel like they're just going to fall out.
100%. That in as people know, we're pretty conversational on this. Before I kind of jump into your background in sponsorship, are you changing anything kind of on the Zoom conversations? Let's say through pitching or prospecting or anything like that. Has there been a change kind of in your process to, obviously there's probably some of, here's how we did it in person, now here's how we're kind of doing it remotely?
Yeah, that's something we've actually talked about as a company, is like how to conduct these meetings. I mean, I know as a seller, I'm so much more a reader of the room. I've always joked that I can sell anywhere in a room, but once I'm on the phone, I lose a certain degree of my ability. So for us, we talk about being prepared, having an agenda, sharing that agenda, just because there's so much volatility in people's schedules right now, especially with working at home. A lot of them have children they're caring for, they've got significant others in the workspace, you have the issues with connectivity. So just being prepared to share that schedule, and making sure that both parties understand, and not being afraid to take the time to still have that personal interaction. Just because you can't joke around like you would face to face doesn't mean you can't take the time to say, how's it going? You got your lawn all figured out for the summer? I mean, we're all at home. Maybe they love gardening, or they're spending more time with their kids. So trying to emulate that in-person meeting as much as we can has been a big focus. But yeah, I mean, more than anything, trying to get on the video as much as possible. That way you can at least read the person. It emulates an in-person meeting as much as possible. But the biggest piece too is just being flexible. I mean, I think you and I talked about this before we jumped on live. It's just, there's so much volatility day to day in where everyone's at. So having the grace to understand that people got to move their schedules, an hour that you may have asked for may only be 45 minutes. And so, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a growth area for me, but I will say it's something I plan to use moving forward, just because, why not learn in this process? Ultimately, that's what we should be doing. And it's as tough as it may be, and as much as there may be going on, doesn't mean we can't take advantage of the opportunity.
Yeah, and I think you're totally right. I mean, selling in person, it's almost like we're relearning kind of those, how to pick up on some of those mannerisms, through Zoom call, where, in a room, it may be totally different. But flexibility is key. I was on a Zoom call the other day with somebody who had a dog. They just picked it up. It was a week into them owning it, and they hadn't trained it on barking. And it's just, barking, and that changes everything, right? And I think you almost build more of a rapport with somebody in being flexible, understanding that, things are going to change, times may change, things may pop up. So it almost weirdly builds that camaraderie with that person, just because we all know that, we're at home and we've been at home for, 3 months and kind of figuring this out. So
it's a hard experience, but it's a shared experience.
Yeah, 100%. Diving into kind of just your quick background, what kind of got you into sponsorship? I'm always intrigued on the stories, because sometimes young people ask me, how do I get into sponsorship? And my answer is, there's about 100 different ways to kind of get into it. For you, kind of what was that journey into the college space, but also just sponsorship sales in general?
Yeah, I probably will add to your 100 different ways of getting into sports. I was a general studies degree, and I teach at Whitworth University here, a Division III school, on the side of doing this job. And I always tell my students, I was a bad student. I just got out. I was like, I got my 4-year degree at Washington State. I didn't really have a focus. I kind of went to general studies. I had an emphasis in Spanish, and I graduated, and I was just kind of like, what now? I didn't really have a job lined up. I didn't really have a direction of like, I want to be this. So I went to a mentor of mine in Spokane who was connected through family friends. And I just said, what should I do? And I still tell my students this today. He just said, go volunteer. Find something you can volunteer in and just meet people. He said, powerful people in communities give back, not only by writing checks, but by giving their time. If you show the willingness to volunteer at things, you may connect with someone. So I got connected with the Spokane Sports Commission, and just I literally walked into their office and just said, hey, can I volunteer? Do you have any internships? Like, yeah, we got an internship. I was like, oh, great. Going to get paid, all this. Like, it's unpaid though. So I spent that summer volunteering at a bunch of events they put on, tandem bike rallies, different bike races. And then I got connected to a triathlon company that needed help as well. So I started doing the same thing there, just jumping on with them and giving time. And I got paid a little bit, which, fresh out of college was nice. Thankfully, I was living in my parents' basement. But through that, I met Ken Halpin, who's now the athletic director at Winthrop University. And he was with a smaller sports marketing company called KP Sports. And he just said, yeah, this is a job I'm doing. I'm building this. And I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. I've always been into sports. I played sports. So kind of left from there, got a job in Seattle. So I moved to Seattle. And then about a year later, Ken called and said, hey, I'm taking another position. Do you want to take advantage of this opportunity? So, as much as retail banking was awesome, I was definitely more excited about sports, and it brought me back to Spokane, where I'm from. So I said yes and jumped in. And so I got in with a company called KP Sports. Our focus was FCS level type programs. So we had Weber State, Eastern Washington. We had Portland State for a while. And then we had some schools down in the Southland Conference, McNeese, Nichols, and then a few conferences. And that was where I got my start. I came in about as green as possible. I think everyone talks about the word sports marketing or the phrase, but very little people understand what exactly that is. And at the end of the day, it truly is a sales role. It's a business development role. And so it jumped in, and, I've been here, almost 8 years. And it's been a wild ride. It was KP Sports, then we were acquired by Learfield back in 2015. And then obviously most recently in the last year and a half, 2 years, our post-merger with Learfield IMG College. So it's been a wild ride. I always tell people I don't really deserve to be in this industry. I'm a circumstance of being lucky and kind of the right place at the right time. But looking back now, I always think about that giving my time was really ultimately what opened that door. And that's something I preach a lot to people around me. So.
Yeah, so much of it, especially in sports, is that I always hear is finding that person who within the sports industry who and you've connected with, who then gets a job somewhere and says, hey, I'm getting a job here. I'd love to pull you in. And that's, so important. People always say, well, why is it important to kind of build that network, within sports sponsorship? And that's usually my answer is people move jobs. And when they move jobs, sometimes there's openings and that may be your shot kind of in. And yeah, it sucks to work for free at first, but that opens up the door for, the next 8 years. So it's always interesting there, for you kind of as a smaller school, comparatively to some of the bigger, let's say, programs or teams, how would you say kind of the pandemic, the shutdown of spring sports and things like that kind of affected you all at Eastern Washington the most with sponsors?
Yeah, we've got a healthy blend of kind of your local, regional, and national brands. Our national comes to our national sales at Learfield IMG College, regional relationships with some of the larger brands and maybe the Spokane, Washington, kind of the Northwest. And then, yeah, you do have those mom and pop businesses. So, the impact we've seen is it's there. I mean, we definitely have clients that have had to shut their doors down for 3 months, and they're asking questions about next season. They're asking about what their flexibility is and payments and things like that. Our focus has just been empathy, showing them that we understand this is not easy. This is a tall task for them as a business. Thankfully, most of our partners seem like they're going to be able to come out of this okay. And really for us, we've just been trying to show that the relationship we have, a relationship is two ways. So we want them to understand that, we want them to be as invested as we are, which also means we understand if they're going to have to take certain concessions moving forward. We've had open conversations with partners that say, hey, I know I've got a couple more years on this contract, but we got to figure something out. And knowing that ahead of time is really healthy. I mean, because then we can protect ourselves from maybe uncollected funds or things like that. And if we know they need to decrease their spend, let's get them on board on a new agreement that's more feasible for them, rather than have them go a whole season being fulfilled and then maybe not paying their full bill. So, our focus has just been communication, nonstop. At the beginning, we were doing weekly calls. I say we, I'm a one-person property. We've got support staff, but it's a one-seller team. But, we were making calls every week and just saying, how are you doing? What's going on? What are you seeing? How is this impacting you? Asking the personal questions too, letting them know that we understand this is going to impact their families. And as everything has moved forward, we've kind of just transitioned those conversations to more, what does a timeline look like for you? Spokane County is in phase 2. So, all the restaurants have just reopened at 50%. So, we're reaching out to our hospitality partners, be like, hey, love to see it. How's it going? Are you seeing what you need to see? Is this tracking for you? And what we've started to do is parallel that with timelines we have, when we need to start talking about fulfilling football, or when we need to start talking about, are they really going to renew? Is it, setting timelines that parallel the public health kind of considerations, and just trying to use that to make a comfortable conversation, rather than just, trying to pummel them and kind of just bury them into their renewal conversation. So it's definitely been interesting, but I think more than anything, we're going to come out of this with our clients knowing that we've shown a lot of grace and that we've been empathetic, and that we're not afraid to have hard conversations with them, knowing that if we do the right things, we're probably going to have a longer relationship with them. May not be as much money, but we're going to keep them on the books by doing the right thing. So yeah, it's been tough, but it's been a lot of learning opportunities.
Yeah, I love that. Thinking about it as you kind of described, as a relationship as opposed to a transaction. Not whether you're going to come back and spend 20K, but how's your business doing? Is 20K still good? Do we need to bring that down to 10K and then maybe 10K the next year? Do we have to be flexible? I think that's really going to be key. For you, kind of as you talk to partners, obviously we're seeing sports come back, but we're not fully sure 100% that some of the fall sports will be back in full capacity. How does that conversation kind of fit in with the conversation you're having with partners? And has that, have they been kind of, I guess, a little bit gun shy, just not knowing whether kind of football is coming back or any of these sports?
Yeah, there's a certain amount of, I would say, doubt from folks. What we are telling people is football is still on the calendar, and we can only operate under what we know right here and right now, and that is that our schedule still stands as it is. Now, we all admit that there's probably going to be changes. There's probably going to need to be some flexibility. But really, we talk about partnerships. Our agreements are written in a way that protect both parties. So, if football was just a wash at any university, there's protections for people, whether it's make goods, price reductions, or refunds if payments have been made. Those are all conversations that we're letting clients know. We're emphasizing that they're protected. If the season doesn't meet their expectations, they are protected. But that doesn't mean we're not being proactive. I think, what we're looking at are, if there is a change in attendance, if there is a change in what we're able to fulfill around a game day experience. I mean, so much of what we do with corporate partners is about the experience. And that doesn't mean just in game. You talk about fan fests outside of the stadium. You talk about tailgate events. You talk about coaches shows. I mean, just all these things that bring people together may or may not be impacted. So we're talking about, if not this, then what? And really just trying to be proactive on saying, like, if we have to pivot, which way are we pivoting and how? And then identifying solutions. And, it's there's a lot of gray area that we're operating in right now. And, you and I rescheduled from earlier this week based on what's going on in the public. And I think that's one of the things that we have to be willing to do is just take what we know each and every day and just go off of that. It's so hard to do work off of assumptions. I think everyone knows the phrase about what assume stands for in reality. And I think it's dangerous sometimes to get forecasting too far down the road. So we're just trying to be proactive and just saying, what all potential scenarios are there and how can we best be prepared and how can we position our partners to be prepared too.
Yeah. Kind of transitioning to new business, obviously before all this shutdown, we were chatting with prospective clients and, looking at hopefully new business to bring in. What's kind of changed there? Has anything kind of shifted on your all in for any new prospects or anything like that?
There's definitely, people are a little more slow to roll, which once again, we're trying to be empathetic because a lot of these businesses are kind of just slowly reopening. But what we're leading with is the power of sports. I'm sure you're having these conversations too, but every next sporting event that's been on TV during this process is the biggest event there's been. You take the match with Phil and Tiger, Peyton and Tom Brady. Someone made a great joke that Tom Brady played pretty poorly. Says he's a 9 handicap, but I think a lot of people would disagree. But he holed out a shot for a birdie from 130 yards. And the joke that I saw was the single most watched golf event ever on television. The single best shot in the entire thing was from Tom Brady, not Tiger Woods, not Phil Mickelson. So it's the power of things like that, and the power to bring communities back together. These communities are going to be starved for that human interaction. That's ultimately the human desire, is to be a part of a community, and generally those communities come back through sports. So, we're trying to emphasize that with partners. When we get back to Roos Field, we're going to have the brand new red turf ready to roll. It's going to be just as red as it's ever been. And, we want businesses to take advantage of that. Right now we're telling them get in now so that you don't have to pay the consequences afterwards. Don't join a year from now when things have picked back up and maybe prices are different. And we're trying to lead with the conversation that now is the time to take advantage of this because more than ever it's accessible and it can make a difference for your business as we all come back out of this. So, the prospecting side has definitely been slower, but I think it's more of a reflection of trying to be cognizant of businesses getting up and going. We're getting a lot of people that are like, yeah, I'm interested. Just give me a month. They're so buried in trying to, fill unemployment paperwork. They're trying to fill jobs that maybe people aren't coming back to, and they're just trying to get operating. So, it's definitely there, and it's going to be a shorter timeline this year for sure. We're going to be doing most of our new business sales in 2.5 months leading up to the season rather than the 6 months you normally get as you kind of turn the page in January. But I think we definitely have the opportunity to continue to grow. It's just going to be to what extent.
Yeah. You kind of brought up fan fests, pregame tailgates. Obviously, in whatever capacity, whether we have full fans coming back or limited fans. I know, I think it was MGM just reopened their casino, obviously with some different safety precautions and things like that. Have you all seen kind of a change in thinking of how that looks for the fan, and then from there how that looks for the sponsor interaction, who have always loved sponsoring a fan fest, but maybe are a little concerned just based on whether people will even show up for that?
Yeah, it's we haven't had too many of our partners reach out necessarily yet. I think they're kind of waiting to see, what public health kind of dictates. But I know we're trying to be proactive, talking about, how can we still enhance the experience, whether maybe it's more visual enhancement than physical enhancement, limiting the touching of things, limiting maybe less games and things like that, and maybe focusing more on, if we bring in some LED screens and just maybe focus more on people watching games around the area, or a pregame show. We talked about having a pre-made show that we can air on the board outside the stadium and give people something to still engage with that makes it a little less physical, but still innately entertaining. And then, obviously your specialty in the digital space, how can we still enhance the experience there? Whether it's app enhancements, digital games, and more interaction on our pregame radio show. So it's definitely something we're preparing for. And I think it's something ultimately that goes more in line with our focus in digital, that's really everyone is focused on anyway. Now that's only going to be amplified based on the expectation of having a little bit less hand-to-hand experience. But I do know a lot of our partners that focus on that and thrive on that. They want to participate. And I think the human nature, a lot of folks will still come back to that. It may not be to at the extent it was before, but I think there will still always be that element of, kind of that human interaction, getting the free promo, you've got the tabling from a random company and you're going to get a free water bottle and some other swag. And so I think we'll still have an element of that, but we're trying to prepare more to allow people the comfortability to maybe not have to do that. They'll have other options.
Yeah. Kind of diving into what you brought up there, digital, obviously right now, all we have is digital just because everything's been shut down. And, whether that's make good for spring sports, whether that's, looking toward next season for how that's starting. Have you all seen, the case where a sponsor didn't really get into that digital piece just because they have been that face-to-face, where they're seeing a lot more interest kind of in those assets? As you're kind of chatting with them?
Absolutely. We our vice president for digital talks a lot about why digital is so important, and the example we always use is like Penn State. Penn State has upwards of 110,000 people at any given football game, but you look at their affiliated fan base and it's well over 1 million. So we try to not get so caught up in delivering the experience to the people in the stadium and talking about the fan base more broadly and how digital can help our partners talk to them. So yeah, we're seeing partners that really, one, they understand why digital is important, because now more than ever, it's really the only way they can be getting to people. But two, the other piece I try to educate a lot of our partners on, it's actually the easiest to derive an ROI. We talk about signage, you talk about impressions generated with TV visibility, in stadium attendance, things like that. It's a variable number. It's a very gray area, but digital really, you can have attributed impressions, you can have, click-through rates, you can have all your enter to wins, you can derive direct data from. And so we're really trying to show partners that, yeah, game day is important. We want you to help play a part in that, but how do we continue to make you a part of our fans' experience 6 other days a week? And we're starting to see a lot of clients are like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And quite honestly, a lot of small businesses we work with, they don't have a digital person. They don't have a digital staff like Learfield IMG does down in Dallas. So we are the expert. We come into the room and we share with them that it's important to have visibility on game day, but it's also equally as important to play a part in the fans' experience throughout the week, because if we can create that many more interactions with them, they're that much more likely to go to our partners. And so there's definitely a move going that way. And I think it's both out of necessity, but also out of growth and understanding that a lot of these companies, they don't have to be the expert. They just need to work with an expert.
Yep. I think hit that perfectly. What we've seen a lot of is teams sometimes think they can't be the digital expert for how to reach, fans. And a lot of times some of the smaller businesses have no idea how to engage, connect, have, a Facebook post lead to a sale. And if you can be that, if you 100%, if you can be that person who does a lot of the heavy lifting for them, but also the expert, it's a lot easier for them to say yes and to dive in a little bit kind of on the digital side.
And what makes it so unique too is that, we have the ability to coach them and we have the ability to lead them. And then we, as the teams, Learfield IMG College represents close to 200 brands. What really matters is our brands have the potential to amplify that digital exposure exponentially. Mm-hmm. You look at the interaction rates, or you look at the exposure created by any of the teams, anywhere from Eastern Washington University to Alabama. The power we have as collegiate brands is so exponentially larger than just your generic Facebook post or Instagram or just digital targeting, that it really makes it so that anything we do is going to innately be extremely powerful just because of the brand itself.
Yeah, in kind of going off a little side here, as far as that brand goes, and obviously people, you just brought up, people can post a Facebook post, but to have that Eastern Washington logo, how much for your alumni base, who I'm sure are across Washington, but across the country, how much does that kind of play into effect, maybe with your smaller, more local partners, but then also any larger kind of sponsors? Do you kind of play into the fact that, the large alumni base and the ability to reach them digitally?
Yeah, I mean it's we talk about it. It's the single most valuable asset we have as a company is the power of the brand. So whether it's Molson Coors, we've got one of our major credit unions, Numerica Credit Union, do an amazing job of activating the brand, and they understand that the power that creates in a marketplace, whether it's point of sale, digital, redirect marketing, things like that, they've seen the exponential difference it provides in that interaction and that ROI. And we even have smaller partners. The consistency we try and create is the access to the brand. We do need to protect it. You can't just have every mom and pop being able to throw the Eastern logo on anything and everything. So making sure you kind of stand by a minimum that you expect for partners to participate in order to use that brand is really key. But yeah, we see a lot of it, and we see more and more people wanting to go to it because it's like I said, they see the power of it. They see it outside of their business. So I think a lot of businesses are like, hey, how can we tap into that? And it's a really difficult area because I know, in our area, we've got Gonzaga, Washington State, Eastern Washington, Idaho, UW to a certain extent comes over here. So you actually see a lot of times where you got companies that do try to take advantage of the brand and not do it the proper route. And then it creates some difficult conversations. And what we explain is, hey, that we have partners that pay for this opportunity. They do things the right way. They honor the contract and they understand the value of it, which they pay for. So we can't just have a random company going rogue and throwing up all the logos wherever they want. So it's definitely something we're seeing more and more people want to participate in, but it's also something we're trying to guard more and more and be consistent on. That way, when a partner does commit, we can be consistent in what we do permit or don't. So,
Yeah. I mean, that's very, very key. It's something I sometimes forget about when working with teams is what does the brand look like? Just because you're not only representing the current sponsor, but you're also representing all the other sponsors who kind of sync that brand up with it. Kind of shifting back a little bit to the pandemic and things reopening. I mean, there has been a lot of creativity. There's been a lot of opportunity to kind of shift some things and, to be honest, build more assets. Has there been any opportunities that you've really seen that have stood out, just as far as, again, either creating assets, driving new revenue, or doing something you wouldn't have necessarily looked at, if this didn't happen and you were still just kind of going through that regular cycle of selling?
Well, I mean, ironically, I didn't mention this to you before we jumped on the call, but the software we're using to run this broadcast right now, we stumbled onto this as well. And we just started doing lunch and learns where we were just creating access and visibility to our coaches because, one, recruiting trails were drying up because they weren't getting out. So we wanted to make sure teams were getting exposure. We wanted to communicate to our fans. And then we were also having some make good conversations. But as we kind of continued to build the broadcast, we started saying, why don't we add this to our coaches shows? Why don't we have this for post-game football shows? And just started talking about all the creative ways that like this single software that we were using more for visibility than anything could become an asset in a ton of other areas. Because you talk about the visibility, you talk about the ability to push it out to your social media channels, and then obviously have it recorded there and reposted and branded. So all of a sudden we were like, this single thing we created really has 10 options to it. So I think for us, that was a really big win. I think across the company, though, there's been some amazing ideas. I think some of the best ones have been ones that are helping promote local businesses. There's been businesses that are promoting each other, kind of cross promotion, which has been really neat to see, trying to, whether it's supporting the medical side or supporting the hospitality side. But yeah, I mean, I think the fan interaction that we're seeing, there's been so many ideas of how to continue to engage fan bases that it's really built a portfolio that someone, a team could go in and just like scroll down an Excel that says 1,000 options, and there would be an ample amount of ways to engage your fan base. There really is no excuse for how to engage your fan base at this point because there's been so many great examples run out by so many teams that it's really pick and choose, and you could probably still put it into play 3 years from now and it would still work. So it's been awesome to see. I know our company went through, it was a hellish process in the spring, but it was amazing to see how many awesome ideas came out of it and how many partners were thrilled. Partners that missed out on spring sports, postseason basketball. And they were like, yeah, that's that hurt, but man, this is awesome. Like, this is a really cool idea. And we've seen some of those ideas become continuous parts of relationships, which is even kind of more unique.
Yeah. Obviously love having all these tools, let's say, in your back pocket. Do you find though that, like, let's say we get somewhat back to normal, obviously you don't want to overload fans kind of with all of these ideas. I've said it before in sponsorship, we should try and be a 24/7, 365, let's call it a media company. Do you find a little bit of overwhelming kind of with the assets, or is there a point where it's like, hey, we've massively diluted the amount of coaches show, scouting show, offensive coordinator show, or anything like that? Or do you kind of see it as, hey, let's try everything and fill it as much as we can?
It really depends on the school. Some schools are a little bit more protective of their space. They're protective of their channels. They want to be cognizant of what is more fan-focused content compared to maybe more corporate-focused content. But I do more than ever, though, we're being proactive and trying to find things that achieve both. Something that can help us achieve our corporate commitments, but also something that fans want. I think right now what we're seeing is fans are starved for anything sports. So it doesn't have to be super fan oriented. It could be something that's corporately pushed, but maybe has a fun, unique element that allows fans to engage with it. But to your point, we look at sports as a 365-day a year experience. So there are partners that can be integrated in the summer. There are partners that want to take advantage of football. There's partners that want to take advantage of basketball. There's really opportunities to execute year round. I think it's just making sure that what we want to deliver aligns with what the school is comfortable with. But like I said, so many of these ideas that have come out now, you could copy and paste it from one sport to another or from one season to another and still execute and properly have a partner positioned in it. So yeah, I think it's definitely something that you have to be cognizant of diluting that feed, because ultimately if it becomes a promoted post every time with a graphic and a sponsor plastered across it, that can get stale. But if you can continue to engage them, find unique ways to interact with the fan base and ultimately derive value. I mean, if you throw a giveaway on most anything, fans are going to engage with it. Everyone loves free swag. So, remembering about what makes the fan experience unique is always going to be important. But yeah, I think being cognizant of it is important. But I know we're certainly at Eastern, we've still got some flexibility in some areas that we can take advantage of.
Yeah. Kind of shifting a little bit to the young guns, the new ones kind of in the business, arguably entering sports in one of the worst times ever to try to get a job in sports, just because, games aren't up, some staff are being furloughed. Do you have kind of any advice for somebody who's either, looking to switch into sports or kind of graduating from that grad program and trying to get that first job in during the current circumstances?
Yeah, I'm not the greatest example because I don't have that sport admin degree. I didn't do the legwork in college like a lot of students do, which is always encouraged, just because you can, as you mentioned, you can build that network, you can find an advocate, you can find someone that can open that door. What I always share with students is that the door doesn't open very often, so you have to take advantage of it. And a lot of times that does mean grinding for very little. I attribute a lot of where I'm at because I was willing to just go do the hard work for very little. I have a former mentor that's moved away, and he always said that the most valuable work someone does for someone is the work they're never paid for, because it's very noticeable how hard someone works when they're doing it for free. Mm-hmm. If they're just slacking off and they're like, well, I'm not getting paid to be here, why would I really invest myself? It's obvious. But if someone's sweating and just pouring themselves into it, and you're like, wow, that guy must, be pretty well taken care of if he's willing to do that. And then you're like, oh, wow, no, he's doing it because he's wanting to make an impression. That goes a long way. I know, because I've had a lot of our game day coordinators, some of my property coordinators that were never paid as much as they were equal to. And I always loved seeing them take another job, because I'm like, all I've ever wanted is for me to not be able to afford you. Mm-hmm. If you can work to make it so someone can't afford to keep you around, that means you've done the right thing. So yeah, I mean, just being willing to grind, take advantage of those opportunities. And, the biggest thing too, don't be afraid to just ask someone for 15 minutes at a time. Hopefully we get back to normal and you can ask them for, if you can buy them a coffee. I think most college kids could swing a coffee. You may not be, maybe not for yourself, but maybe for the person you're asking to meet with. But being willing to just ask someone for 15, 30 minutes of their time, you'd be surprised how many great leaders in these communities will give it to you, because a lot of them only have what they have because someone else gave them 30 minutes. And I tell my students that as soon as they're done with class, like I give them my cell phone number, I give them my email, I tell them where to contact me, and I just say, if you ever need anything, if I can ever help, just call. Quite a few of them take advantage of it, but I think it's always healthy to remind people of that.
Yeah, and as you know, being at that hectic game day where, if you're an intern, you're learning how fast-paced things happen. What a lot of people don't realize, how much stuff goes wrong that you have to fix, at a moment's notice. Is there any advice for people coming out, just because that is such a valuable piece of working in sports? Is there any advice for people kind of just coming out toward not getting that experience, but kind of trying to work toward that, so that they can be a little bit more valuable when we do get games back, toward just understanding what a game day experience is?
Yeah, I've fortunately had an amazing game day staff over the past few years. We operate our own hospitality space during Eastern Washington football games, and we've had upwards of 200 people in there. Mm-hmm. And so, the thing I advocate with my team is that it's patience and communication. We have to focus on the game experience, and we can't take that away from fans. So when something goes wrong, which there always is something, we had the partner, we had Dutch Bros in our stadium, and the generator, or their machines blew out. They lost the ability to make half their drinks, and they just pivoted immediately. We started working through that, and then we had stuff in our hospitality space. And I just told my team, we have to play patience in front of fans. It may be hectic, things may be going crazy, but you need to focus on continuing to make sure their experience is positive, because we need them to come back, and we need them to think highly of what they experienced, even in a bad situation. And then just over communication, whether it's running it up the ladder to whoever needs to hear about it, or, making sure you're engaging with fans, understanding what the issue is, understanding what went wrong. And that's operationally too, whether it's on-field presentations, things like that. Because ultimately too, after each game, you got to take time to look at and say, what went right, what went wrong, how do we get better? Yeah. And it's being calm in chaos goes a long way. And internally, you may not be calm, but as long as you're presenting it and you're operating as it is, it's going to help you come out of those game days a lot stronger, because there's no benefit to allowing that chaos to consume you and just lose it at a game day. I've seen people kind of lose control a little bit, and it's just no one benefits. No. So the patience, communication, and just being calm in chaos is huge.
Yeah, and you may have just covered it, but for you, when you kind of look at that new game day staff or new intern, kind of what are you really looking for when you're chatting with them or evaluating, kind of, hey, we're going to bring you on board? And again, it might be tough to do in an interview setting, but are there any kind of specific things that you're really looking for as you chat and evaluate kind of that new staff?
Yeah, and our former athletic director here at Eastern Washington, Bill Chaves, who's at North Dakota now. I was young when I started this job. I think I was 23. And, I was coming into work kind of scraggly, kind of dragging a little bit. You're not used to, grinding as much as you do in this industry. And he just kind of mentioned at one point, he said, you got to be excited to be here. You got to love what you do. You got to love what you do, and you got to bring energy. And I really tried to focus on that moving forward. And I look for that in our workers. It's a grind. We've got workers moving ice and beer. Like, it's not riveting stuff, but you're doing it in a sports event. You're getting paid to be at a sporting event, and ultimately can lead to a career in that. So having an energy about it, being excited to be there, when you got a crap task in front of you, yeah, it sucks and it's a grind, but you're there and you've got that door open and you've got the chance to take advantage of it. So just having the right energy. I think of some of our game day workers that, like, every time I had something for them, they seemed like they wanted to run to it. Like, it could be moving beer, it could be moving signage, fixing a sign, and they're like, yeah, I'm on it, got it. Like, just almost seemed like excited to have the opportunity. And that goes a long way, because that just impacts everyone. That type of energy changes culture, and that type of culture keeps people, winning. It keeps fans coming back. So as much as you can portray that, and as much as you can perpetuate that is huge, because it's going to change how other people act as well.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I had a sports tech or sports business boss who interns, I didn't have to do it because I came in a little bit higher, but interns started off at guest services. And he would watch about how you interact when a fan maybe is losing it because of something that's maybe out of everybody's control, how you interact with, how you interact in different situations. Because obviously if somebody's coming to guest services, they're coming with a problem. Nobody walks up to guest services and says, hey, I love you guys. You guys are doing great. Good job. And that's just, that's a great place to start. Not only that, because you start to understand the different problems that are going to rise and how you can maybe fix them. So it's definitely throw them to the wolves, see how they'll interact with your fans. But I think that was a key thing. And it really, really, looking at the people who came out of that experience from that intern class, the rock stars proved it then. And there was even some people who did terribly in those first 2 games and then just realized what they had to do and really had to pick it up.
Yep.
So as we kind of wind down here, I always end this with this. Any questions for me on kind of our end or the digital space or anything that's kind of going through your head on the sponsorship side?
I know obviously we've talked before, but what most excites you about what's happening right now? Because I think as much negative as there is, there's also some really amazing things that are going to come out of this. You talk about most times when there's some sort of tragedy, a lot of great things come out of it. I was listening to a podcast and they talked about, World War II created the vulcanization of rubber. We couldn't manufacture rubber until post World War II. You have nuclear power came out of World War II. I mean, you have like innovation that comes out of these hard times. Is there something that you're seeing that's really exciting you about how our space is changing because of, kind of the ongoing pandemic issues?
Yeah, especially in sports, and I kind of chatted about this pre-pandemic is, my big thing is in sports, in sponsorship, we're an advertising asset, right? And we're better at some things than other assets. We're worse at some things than others. But, what we weren't really doing is diving into digital. And the reason why is not just because, hey, people are there. It's because brands were spending their dollars there. And to be honest, I think we got a little bit comfortable with, hey, we sell in stadium signs. Yes, we're doing a few things, digitally, but we're doing a few, highlight posts with a sponsor's logo on it. The thing that excites me right now the most is what we've done just as an industry is we've added very creative assets that are digital that, as we talked about, you can absolutely do when we get things back to normal. So I think for sponsorship, this was almost a reset to say, as you know, in sports, it's the craziness of the season. It's a month of recap. It's a month of planning for next season. And the next thing you know, you're right back into kind of that next season. Yeah. And I think this kind of gave us, a little bit of a pause to say, let's get a little bit crazy. Let's get a little bit interactive. And I think the biggest thing is when you look at whether a brand's going to buy a Facebook ad campaign or purchase your campaign, the biggest thing that adding these digital assets, and we chatted with this, David Anderson over at Bowling Green, is now they have a trackable asset for their restaurant partners that, if that restaurant ran a Facebook ad, they wouldn't get as much loyalty or conversion, but they can actually say, we helped you sell X amount of meals. So I think the big opportunity is sticking with, as we kind of talked about, sticking with some of these creative assets. The entire industry has now almost gotten to a level playing field with, again, if I'm a brand and I'm thinking, hey, what am I going to spend my dollars on? I'm probably really looking into a lot of college programs, a lot of sports programs now, because they do have that trackability asset. The big question, and what's interesting, is there's an actual monetary way we can help decide this. From what everybody's reporting, we've lost $17 billion or 30% of sponsorship value, right? The interesting thing is we can actually look back a year or 2 years from now and say, how good were we at shifting this? Did we actually over a year and a half make up that money, right?
Yeah.
Like if we're down 30%, because we implemented digital assets for the next 2 years, eventually we made it up. And this was just kind of prolonging that value. So I think the biggest opportunity here is, it's the taboo thing to say digital, but I think it's more so understanding how you fit within what is digital advertising. And then I think the key thing you'll see is the really good organizations are going to aren't just going to say, hey, we're back to games, so now we're not going to do this. They're going to keep going, hopefully have some time to keep innovating. And the more you can understand how to monetize Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, and these platforms for your teams, the more value you can bring. So I think that's the biggest thing. Is if I was still selling sponsorship, I'd almost be extremely excited, because not only do I have the in-stadium assets, I now have all these digital things to where, the objection of, well, we only spend on Facebook ads, right? Like to be honest, that's no longer an objection, because, hey, you're spending on Facebook ads to get trackable sales. We can do the same thing here. And that's,
like we're excited
we're
excited when people say Facebook, because we know we can do Facebook and we can do it better.
And that's the thing, is like the reason why people pay so much for influencers, which technically sports teams are influencers, is it's one thing to just run your logo. We see, thousands of ads a day. It's another thing, like, I'm from Oakland, I'm a Raiders fan. If I'm scrolling through my feed and there's an ad with a Raiders logo, I'm stopping, right? And the same thing with you all at Eastern Washington. If you're an alumni scrolling through and you see that ad, you're going to stop. And their ad can't do that. Your advertising or your post is going to do that. And that's why they're going to probably spend more money with you than they would on Facebook ads, because of that. And I think we finally have the tools to integrate that, right? As opposed to before, we kind of dipped our toes in a little bit. And I think we lost a lot of value doing that. As terrible as the pandemic was and really is, if there's one thing that's come out of it that's really good, is the ability to come in and say, we've now technically probably tripled the amount of assets we can sell, and our toolkit has gotten bigger. So I think that's the biggest opportunity here, is almost a rebirth of what sponsorship is. And now we can kind of punch above our weight class a little bit more, and have success. Because as I talked with David, it's at Bowling Green, no Facebook ads manager is going to call you on the phone and see how you're doing during the pandemic. They're going to say, hey, do you want to run these ads, or do you not want to run these ads?
Yeah.
So I think that's having both of those in sponsorship is just going to be hugely key for everybody.
Yeah.
So awesome, man. Well, thanks so much for jumping on, Tim. If people want to kind of see what you guys are doing at Eastern Washington, or get caught up, what's kind of the best way to kind of check you all out?
Obviously, it's always goeags.com. We got all the news about any team updates, things like that, upcoming football season. We got a stacked home schedule that we're excited about. And then, all of our social media stuff's EW Athletics. So you can find what we're doing there. And we've got we're just excited to get back to sports. We got the new red turf going in the next month. So you'll see some bright red turf on Google Earth.
I love the red turf. There's nothing like that Inferno red. Especially when I turn on ESPN sometimes and Eastern Washington's playing, it's just an immediate like, oh yeah, that's right. Eastern Washington plays on bright
It's hard to
turf.
deny, man. It's funny when we have teams that haven't ever played here, FCS playoffs, stuff like that. You get teams from like the East Coast. They'll come in and they'll pull pieces of it up as if it's not the exact same turf they play on. Just because it's red, people think it's like a totally different synthetic process. And it's like, no, man, it's just the same turf you play on. It's just really bright red. You know what? Thing is, you go across the country and people know it, and that's a lot of where our brand comes from, and we own it. So
I gotta imagine in the same way we were talking about Zoom calls having our eyes get tired. I gotta imagine QBs have their eyes a little bit tired as they're looking downfield trying to find the receivers, and they're just bright red coming up.
Home field advantage, man. It's just the same as a school that wears green running on green grass, right?
Yep, exactly. Well, thanks so much, Tim. Really appreciate your time. Excited to chat for you, and thanks everybody else for tuning in here on Sponsorship Morning Coffee, and hope you have a great day.
Thanks, man.